Alright, what's up guys? So if you guys hear that sound, that's the dryer going, and you'll probably hear the furnace come on, because it's only, I want to say 29 degrees up, but with the wind chill it's probably 10, which is completely fine here. I mean, we once had negative 60 once, like last week or 2 weeks ago, so doesn't mind me. I just hate sub-zero temperatures and ice. Snow is fine to me. I love the snow. It's my favorite precipitation. It's my favorite season is winter. But yeah, so last week you guys really enjoyed the first part to the O.J. Simpson case. This is part 2, and so on this part we're going to get into the first part of the trial, which is very, very long, so I'm only going to do just the trial part, and then I'm going to get into the case itself. The prosecution case is probably the longest part, and I plan on going into absolutely everything. I can't wait to get on Mark Furman. Fuck that guy. So yeah, I may talk a little bit about what happened after the trial itself, just like a little bit of a few things. But like I said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many parts it takes, because it's episode 11. So like today, I'm going to talk about the trial, and then like the jury selection. And then after that, I'm going to get a little bit into the prosecution case, but not absolutely everything, because that's the longest part, and probably next part will probably be the longest part of the entire case. But let's get into it. So on June 20th, Simpson was arraigned and pleaded not guilty to both murders. As expected, the presiding judge ordered that Simpson be held without bail. The following day, a grand jury was called to determine whether to indict him for the 2 murders. 2 days later, on June 23rd, the grand jury was dismissed as a result of excessive media coverage, which could have influenced its verdict of the trial. Jill Shivery, a Brentwood resident who testified that she saw Simpson speeding away from the area of Nicole's house on the night of the murders, told the grand jury that the Bronco almost collided with a Nissan at the intersection of Bundy and San Vicente Boulevard. Another grand jury witness, cutlery salesman named Jose Camacho, said he had sold Simpson a 15-inch German-made knife similar to the murder weapon 3 weeks before the killings. Chivalry and Camacho were not presented by the prosecution at the criminal trial because they had sold their stories to the tabloid press. Chivalry had told to the television show Hard Copy for $5,000. What? Wait, I didn't know you could tell a story and get paid. What? I didn't know that. Oh my god. Oh, well. While Camacho told his story to the National Enquirer for $12,500. That's nuts to me that you can actually get paid for that stuff. Wow. Rather than a grand jury hearing, authorities held a probable cause hearing to determine whether or not to bring Simpson to trial. This was a minor victory for Simpson's lawyers because it would give them access to evidence as it was being presented by the prosecution, in contrast to the procedure in a grand jury hearing. After a week-long court hearing, California Superior Court Judge Kathleen Kennedy Powell ruled on July 7th that there was sufficient evidence to bring Simpson to trial for the murders. At his second arraignment on July 22nd, around a month after the first one, when asked how he pleaded to the murder, Simpson, breaking a courtroom practice that says the accused may plead using only the words guilty or not guilty, firmly stated absolutely 100% not guilty. District Attorney Gil Garcetti elected to file charges in downtown Los Angeles as opposed to Santa Monica, where the crime took place. The decision would prove to be highly controversial, especially after Simpson was acquitted. It likely resulted in a jury pool with more black people, Mexican people, and Asian Americans and blue-collar workers that would have been found from Santa Monica. The prosecution decided not to seek the death penalty and instead sought a life sentence. Deputy District Attorney Marcia Clark was designated as the lead prosecutor. Deputy District Attorney Christopher Darden became Clark's co-counsel. Simpson wanted a speedy trial, and the defense and prosecuting attorneys worked around the clock for several months to prepare the cases. In October 1994, Judge Lance Ito started interviewing 304 prospective jurors, each of whom had to fill out a 75-page questionnaire. On November 3rd, 12 jurors were seated with 12 alternates. The trial began on January 24th, 1995, and was televised by Court TV and in part by other cable and network news outlets for 134 days. Darden argued that Simpson killed his ex-wife in a jealous rage. The prosecution opened its case by playing a 911 call from Nicole Brown Simpson on January 1st, 1989, in which she expressed fear that Simpson would physically harm her, and he could be heard yelling at her in the background. Other material related to domestic violence was presented, including another 911 phone call that Nicole made on October 25th, 1993, expressing the same thing, and Simpson also could be heard shouting in the background, less than 8 months before the murders. The prosecution also presented dozens of expert witnesses to place Simpson at the scene of the crime on subjects ranging from DNA profiling to blood and shoe print analysis. During the opening weeks of the trial, the prosecution presented evidence that Simpson had a history of physically abusing Nicole. Simpson's trial, Alan Dershowitz, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, argued that only a tiny fraction of women who are abused by their spouses are murdered. Within days after the start of the trial, lawyers and those viewing the trial from a single closed-circuit TV camera in the courtroom saw an emerging pattern. Continual and countless interruptions with objections from both sides of the courtroom, as well as one sidebar conference after another with the judge, beyond earshot of the unseen jury located just below and out of the camera's frame. According to media reports, Clark thought that women, regardless of race, would sympathize with the domestic violence aspect of the case and connect with her personally. On the other hand, the defense's research suggests that women generally were more likely to acquit than men, and that jurors did not respond well to Clark's combative style of litigation. The defense also speculated that black women would not be as sympathetic as white women to the victim, who was white, because of tensions about interracial marriages. Both sides accepted a disproportionate number of female jurors. From an original jury pool of 40% white, 28% black, 17% Mexican, and 15% Asian, the final jury for the trial had 10 women and 2 men, of which there were 9 black people, 2 white people, and 1 Mexican person. At the start of the trial, 12 jurors and 12 alternates were selected from a pool of 250 potential jurors. That's a crap ton of jurors. Over the course of the trial, 10 were dismissed for a wide variety of reasons. Only 4 of the original jurors remained on the final panel. During the middle of the trial, a number of the jurors staged what the media called a revolt. After being sequestered for 101 days, 13 of the 18 jurors refused to enter the courtroom until they were granted a meeting with Judge Ito. Eventually, the jury returned with 13 members wearing black or dark-colored clothing in what was described as a funeral procession. And then I'm going to end that there for the prosecution case. I'll talk about that in the next part. That's going to be the longest part, and I'm going to probably cut it in sections. Probably going to get to evidence presented to the jury, DNA evidence, and then do Mark Furman last. Save the worst for the last. The worst scum of the life last. So, yeah. So, yeah. Or I guess I could talk about it. Alright. According to media reports, Clark thought that, Alright, so prosecution believed it had a strong case despite the lack of known witnesses to the crime and the failure to recover the murder weapon, which was found 20 years later. Clark's case was supported by DNA evidence, and she suspected a conviction. From the physical evidence that was collected, the prosecution claimed that Simpson drove to Brown's house on the evening of June 12th with the intention of killing her. They maintained that Brown had put their 2 children to bed and was getting ready to go to bed herself when she opened the front door of her house after either responding to a knock on the front door or hearing a noise outside. Simpson allegedly grabbed her before she could scream and attacked her with a knife. Forensic evidence from the Los Angeles County coroner alleged that Goldman arrived at the front gate to the townhouse sometime during the assault, and the assailant apparently attacked him and stabbed him repeatedly in the neck and chest with one hand while retaining him with an armed chokehold. Brown was found lying face down when authorities arrived at the crime scene. According to the prosecution's account, after Simpson had finished with Goldman, he pulled Brown's head back using her hair, put his foot on her back, and slit her throat with the knife, severing her carotid artery, which means that you basically bleed out in minutes. They argued further that Simpson left a trail of blood, a quote, trail of blood, end quote, from the condo to the alley behind it. There was also testimony that 3 drops of Simpson's blood were found on the driveway near the gate to his house on Rockingham Drive. According to the prosecution, Simpson was last seen in public at 9:36 p.m. that evening when he returned to the front gate of his house with Kaylin, a bit part actor and family friend who had been given the use of the guest house on Simpson's estate. Simpson was not seen again until 12:54 p.m., so what the hell did he do for that hour and almost a half? An hour and 18 minutes later, when he came out of the front door to his house to a waiting limousine he had hired to take him to Los Angeles International Airport to fly to a Hertz convention in Chicago. The defense and prosecution both agreed that the murders took place between 10:15 and 10:40, which is a perfect time because he was still there, with the prosecution alleging that Simpson had given his Bronco during the required 5 minutes to and from the murder scene. They presented a witness in the vicinity of Bundy Drive who saw a car similar to Simpson's Bronco speeding away from the area at 10:35 p.m. Limousine driver Alan Park testified that he arrived at Simpson's estate at 10:24 p.m. Driving past the Rockingham gate, he did not see Simpson's Bronco parked at the curb. Park testified that he had been looking for and had seen the house number, and the prosecution presented exhibits to show that the position in which the Bronco was found the next morning was right next to the house number, implying that that Park would surely have noticed the Bronco if it had been there at that time. According to Simpson's version of events, the Bronco had been parked in the position for several hours. Meanwhile, Kaylin was in his guest house and on the telephone to his friend Rachel Ferreira. Park parked opposite the Ashford Street gate, then drove back to the Rockingham gate to check which driveway would have the best access for the limo, deciding that the Rockingham entrance was too tight. He returned to the Ashford gate and began to buzz the intercom at 10:40, getting no response. Park got out of the limo and looked through the Ashford gate and saw that the house was dark with no lights on except for a dim light coming from one of the second-floor windows, which was Simpson's bedroom. While smoking a cigarette, Park made a series of phone calls from his cellular to the pager of his boss, Dale St. John, and in the Park's home, trying to get St. John's home phone number from his mother in an attempt to get the phone number for Simpson's house. At approximately 10:50, Kaylin, who was still on the phone to Ferreira, heard 3 thumps against the outside wall of his guest house. Kaylin hung up the phone and ventured outside to investigate the noises, but decided not to venture directly down the dark south pathway for which the thumps had originated, which is weird. Instead, he walked to the front of the property and saw Park's limo outside the Ashford gate. Now, it is smart, because I guess you don't want to end up like a horror movie, but I guess you could just peek out and see what's going on. At the same time, Park saw Kaylin come from the back of the property to the front and testified that directly behind Kaylin, a short distance away, that he saw a, quote, a tall black man, end quote, of Simpson's height and build enter the front door of the house from the driveway area, after which lights were turned on and Simpson finally answered Park's call. Simpson explained that he had overslept and would be at the front gate soon. Kaylin opened the Ashford gate to let Park drive the limo onto the estate grounds, and Simpson came out of his house through the front door a few minutes later. Both Kaylin and Park helped Simpson put his belongings, which were already outside the front door, and Park drove up to the front of Simpson's house, into the trunk of the limo for the ride to the airport. Both Kaylin and Park remarked in their testimony that Simpson looked agitated, but other witnesses, including the ticket clerk at LAX who checked Simpson onto the plane, and a flight attendant, said that Simpson looked and acted perfectly normal. Conflicting testimonies such as this was to be a recurring theme throughout the trial. Simpson's initial claim that he was asleep at the time of the murders were refuted by several different accounts. According to defense lawyer Johnny Cochran, Simpson had never left his house that night, and he was alone as he packed his belongings to travel to Chicago. Cochran claimed that Simpson went outside through the back door to hit a few golf balls in the children's sandbox in the front garden, one or more of which made the 3 loud thumps on the wall of Kaylin's bungalow. Okay. Cochran produced a potential alibi witness, Rosa Lopez, a neighbor's Spanish-speaking housekeeper who testified that she had seen Simpson's car parked outside his house at the time of the murders. However, Lopez's account, which was not presented to the jury, was pulled apart under intense cross-examination by Clark when she was forced to admit that she could not be sure of the precise time she saw Simpson's Bronco outside the house. The defense tried to convince the jury that Simpson was not physically capable of carrying out the murder, saying that Goldman was a fit young man who put up a fierce struggle against his assailant. Simpson was a 46-year-old former football player with chronic arthritis and had scars on his knees from old football injuries. However, Clark produced into evidence an exercise video that Simpson made a few months before the murders titled O.J. Simpson Minimum Maintenance Fit for Men, which showed that despite some physical conditions and limitations, Simpson was anything but frail. The prosecution called Brown's sister Denise to the witness stand. She tearfully testified to many episodes of domestic violence in the 1980s when she saw Simpson pick up his wife and hurl her against a wall, stupid bastard, then physically throw her out of their house during an argument. Goddamn. The prosecution then called Karen Lee Crawford, the manager of the Mendaluna restaurant where Brown ate on the night she was murdered. Crawford recounted that Brown's mother phoned the restaurant at 9:37 p.m. about a pair of lost eyeglasses. Crawford found them and put them in a white envelope. Goldman left the restaurant at 9:50 p.m. after his shift, taking the glasses to drop them off at Brown's house. Brown's neighbor Pablo, not going to pronounce that last name, testified about hearing a quote, very distinctive barking, end quote, and quote, plaintive wail, end quote, of a dog at around 10 to 15 minutes after 10. While he was at home watching the news on television, Eva Stein, another neighbor, testified about very loud and persistent barking, also at around 10:15 p.m. that kept her from going to sleep. Neighbor Steve Schnaub testified that while he was walking his dog in the area near Brown's house at around 11:30 p.m., he noticed Brown's wandering and agitated dog trailing its leash. He saw that it had bloody paws, but after examining it, he found that the dog uninjured. Schnaub said that he took the dog to a neighbor friend of his, Sakru Boztep, before taking it into his home where it became more agitated. Boztep took the dog for a walk at approximately 12 midnight and testified that it tugged at its leash and led him to Brown's house. There he discovered Brown's dead body. Manslayer. Boztep flagged down a passing police car. Risk, the first officer at the crime scene, testified that he found a barefoot woman in the black dress lying face down in a puddle of blood on the walkway that led to the front door of her house. He next saw Goldman's body a short distance away, lying on its side beside a tree and off the walkway. Risk said that he saw a white envelope, which was later found to contain the glasses left at the restaurant by Brown's mother. He saw Goldman's beeper, a black leather glove, and a dark blue knit ski cap on the ground near the bodies. The front door of Brown's house was wide open, but there were no signs of forced entry nor any evidence that anyone had entered the premises. Nothing inside was out of the ordinary. On Sunday, February 12, 1995, a long motorcade traveled to Brentwood, and the jurors, prosecutors, defense lawyers, and Judge Ito made a 2-hour inspection of the crime scene. It was followed by a 3-hour tour of Simpson's estate. Simpson was under guard by several officers but did not wear handcuffs. He waited outside the crime scene in and around an unmarked police car and was permitted to enter his house. Detective Ron Phillips testified that when he called Simpson in Chicago to tell him that his ex-wife's murder, he sounded shocked and upset but did not ask about how she died. Lang testified that Brown was probably killed first because the soles of her bare feet were clean, implying that she was struck down to the ground before any blood flowed. This was a key point that suggests Simpson might have set out to kill Brown, whereas Goldman appeared to have inadvertently stumbled upon the scene, prompting Simpson to kill him as well. In cross-examining Lang, Cochran proposed 2 hypotheses for what happened at the murder scene. First, he suggested that one or more drug dealers encountered Brown while looking for her friend and house guest, Faye Resnick, an admitted cocaine abuser. And the second hypothesis, Cochran suggested that, quote, an assailant or assassins, end quote, followed Goldman to Brown's house to kill him. Alright, so that is it. Almost 22 minutes long, so next week we'll get into the evidence presented to the jury. So make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later.